Avery Grant's hands tightened around her phone, her breath shallow and tight in her chest. The airport terminal buzzed with its usual rhythm voices echoing across high ceilings, luggage wheels skittering over polished floors, and the occasional clink of boarding passes being scanned. But for Avery, none of that mattered. Not now. Not after everything she had done to ensure this one simple thing wouldn't be a problem. She'd already checked in. She'd confirmed the flight, the seat, the connections, and, most importantly, the special meal request submitted, acknowledged, and reconfirmed in multiple emails, all attached neatly in a folder on her phone. Her dietary needs weren't about preference. They were about survival. As the food cart slid slowly down the aisle, a wave of unease crept up her spine. The flight attendant pushing it wore a polished, well-practiced smile. The kind that didn't quite meet the eyes. The kind that suggested efficiency, not empathy. Averis gut twisted. She already knew what was coming. When a tray landed on her fold-down table, the moment stretched like pulled string. She lifted the foil cover and saw dairy. The main entree was slathered in a cream-based sauce, something that could send her to the ER in less than an hour. Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry," Avery said softly, keeping her tone polite. "This meal isn't safe for me. I requested a dairy-free option weeks ago. It should be on file." The attendant didn't even glance at her tray. "It's just a meal," she said, her voice indifferent as she began pushing the cart toward the next row. Just a meal. 2 words. Casual, dismissive, and dangerous. Avery stared at the tray, heart pounding. She felt that familiar burn at the back of her throat, the same one that had followed her into boardrooms, project reviews, and public speaking events, where she was always the only black woman in a sea of executives. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about being seen. She reached into her purse and retrieved a sleek black leather card holder. From it, she pulled out a simple white business card with her name engraved in clean, bold font. Avery Grant, Vice President of Global Customer Experience. The name carried weight. Authority. Power she rarely wielded outside her office, but today she would make an exception. When the cart returned and the senior flight attendant stopped beside her row with that same hollow smile, Avery didn't speak right away. She simply extended the card. The woman hesitated, then took it. Her eyes scanned the name. They widened, and then they fell. "I didn't want to do this," Avery said calmly, her voice even composed. "But this is no longer about a meal. It's about your response to a passenger's medical needs. Effective immediately, you were suspended, pending internal review." The words landed heavy in the confined cabin. Passengers looked up. The air felt thicker. The engines hummed beneath them, but inside that narrow aisle, there was only silence. The senior attendant stepped back, stunned. Her mouth opened, then closed. Avery looked her straight in the eye. "We don't ignore people. Not on my watch." She sat back in her seat, feeling a storm of emotions surge and settle. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from adrenaline, but from clarity. She wasn't just defending herself. She was standing for every overlooked voice that never got to speak up. Every mother who had to beg for a peanut-free snack for her child. Every passenger who had been told their needs were just preferences. Every employee who had been trained to follow policy, but not taught to lead with care. When the plane landed and Avery stepped into the terminal, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt responsible. What came next mattered. In the days that followed, emails flooded her inbox, some angry, most grateful. Other passengers had witnessed what happened. Some shared similar stories. A father with a son who had celiac disease wrote, "Watching you stand up for yourself gave me the strength to do the same for my child. Thank you." The company launched a formal review. HR got involved. Internal meetings filled Avery's calendar. She was prepared. This wasn't her first battle. She outlined policy failures, traced communication gaps, and pushed for systemic overhaul. She met with the airline's executive team and laid out a comprehensive reform plan. Real solutions, not PR bandages. Mandatory empathy training. Enhanced software that tracked meal requirements accurately. an internal accountability system that would prevent dismissals like the one she faced from ever happening again. The CEO nodded. "We'll make this right," he promised. Weeks turned to months. Slowly, things began to shift. The culture hard to change and slow to adapt showed signs of movement. Crew members received new training. Feedback improved. Avery watched from the inside as the industry's wheels turned, not fast, but forward. And then one evening, an email appeared in her inbox from Michelle, the junior attendant who had been polite, who had tried. It read, "I passed my new training today. I wanted to thank you. What you did showed me what leadership really looks like. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You acted. That moment changed how I see this job. I hope to be someone who listens better now because of you." Avery stared at the screen, her eyes misting. That message, more than any policy or executive pledge, told her the truth. Change had begun. It would take time, but it had started, and it would ripple through the airline, the industry, and the countless lives that intersected at 30,000 feet. Not because someone shouted, but because someone finally listened. Avery sat alone in her office the following evening, the city lights casting a soft glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of late-night traffic a distant background to her thoughts. The message from Michelle still lingered in her inbox, but more than that, it echoed in her mind like a quiet victory anthem. Not the kind that called for celebration, but the kind that whispered truth. Change is possible. Across her desk were the latest reports, internal audits, customer feedback, HR evaluations, all pointing to a shift. Since the incident, complaints had decreased. Passenger satisfaction, particularly from those requiring special accommodations, had risen sharply. Her reforms were working. Not flawlessly, but visibly. She picked up a framed photo from the edge of her desk. It was a picture of her and her mother taken decades ago on their first plane ride together. Avery was barely 8, her legs swinging above the cabin floor, her mother holding her hand tightly, smiling through the nerves. She remembered the peanuts on the tray table. Her mother had asked the attendant if there were any other snacks Avery's allergy had already manifested by then, but the request was brushed off. "You don't look sick," the attendant had said. It wasn't the peanuts that had hurt Avery. It was that sentence, that seed of dismissal. And over the years, it had grown into every meeting where she was talked over, every time her ideas were credited to someone else, every stare when she boarded early with a medical note, every "Are you sure it's that serious?" Every look that said, "You don't belong here." That flight decades ago was just the beginning. Now she was in the position to ensure it would be the end. A knock at her office door pulled her from her thoughts. Peter stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here?" he asked, setting one down for her. "I needed quiet to think," she replied. "It's been about a heavy month." Peter sat across from her. "That's an understatement. But look what you've done." She nodded, not quite ready to smile. "It feels like I've opened a floodgate. Emails, interviews, forums, stories from people I've never met. People who feel seen for the first time. That's leadership," Peter said. "Not fixing everything, just making people feel like they matter." She looked down at her desk, then at the photo again. "I think I've always been chasing that moment. Wanting to make the system better, so no little girl sitting next to her mother has to hear that she doesn't look sick." Peter was quiet for a moment. "And you've done that. You made it safer, more humane." She exhaled. "But there's still so much to do. Other departments are asking for guidance now around staff, call centers, even corporate travel services. They want to replicate the model." "Good," Peter said. "That's how it spreads, one wing at a time." The next morning, Avery was scheduled to speak at a leadership summit. Not for her company, but for a coalition of major airlines working on cross-company standards for inclusion and customer health safety. Her name had risen in the ranks since the incident. Not because she sought the spotlight, but because her actions demanded attention. At the summit, she stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on her face. The room was filled with executives, policymakers, customer advocates, all of them watching, listening. She told the story not just of that flight, but of everything before it, of what it meant to be made invisible in plain sight, of how systems failed not because of policy, but because of attitude. and of what it meant when someone finally stood up and said, "No more." Her closing words hung in the air. Dignity is not a luxury. Safety is not a request. Respect is not optional. The applause was long and full. And somewhere near the back of the room, she spotted Michelle, now in a new uniform with a leadership pin. A few weeks later, Avery was invited to oversee the development of a global protocol for all international carriers, a guideline rooted in empathy, technology, and accountability. It would become the gold standard, adopted by major alliances across the globe. She knew this was no longer just her fight. It was a movement. On a return flight from Geneva, a flight attendant approached her seat mid-flight. "Ms. Grant," she said softly, "we've triple confirmed your meal. And if there's anything at all you need, please let us know." Avery smiled, thanked her, and glanced down at her tray exactly what she needed. Not just the food, but the feeling that, finally, someone had listened. And she knew in her heart, this was only the beginning.